Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dissenter Weekly update for November 19th, 2020. I'm Kevin Gosztola, the managing editor for Shadowproof.com. We've got a few stories for you this week, but before we get rolling on them, Brian has a few things for you.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Kevin. Good to be with you again today. Just wanted to give my regular reminder to make sure that you are subscribed wherever you're watching us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. It's a good way to keep up to date on this show, on the reporting we do at Shadowproof. And if you'd like to support us and you want to help us fund the work that Kevin does, if you want to help us pay freelance writers to do the reporting that you're reading at Shadowproof, you can go either to dissenter.substack.com, which we will talk about at the end of the show, Kevin's awesome newsletter, or you can go to shadowproof.com/donate, chip in a few bucks, subscribe as a member, and help keep our independent press organization going. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news for today, Kevin. Our first story here, we have Australian military whistleblower who revealed war crimes in Afghanistan demands charges to be dropped. What happened today?
Yeah, so as we are recording this show, something that has dominated the global news media is this Brereton report, which examined allegations of Australian special forces being engaged in committing war crimes in Afghanistan. And there have actually been indications that potentially 19 different soldiers could find themselves prosecuted in Australia. And at the same time, there is this whistleblower named David McBride who was involved in revealing or leaking documents about the unlawful killings of unarmed civilians in Afghanistan to the ABC. That's the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in Australia. And the Australian Federal Police considered bringing a case against journalist Dan Oakes over the publication last month, backed away from that, but still has this case pending against David McBride. The offenses, as laid out by the Canberra Times, say that it includes the theft of Commonwealth property and the unauthorized disclosure of material to journalists. And so this is something that I think should be very alarming, and his lawyers are raising the fact that right now we're seeing that the country is reckoning with the role of the special forces who were deployed to Afghanistan with other coalition forces, and we're getting gruesome details about the conduct that they engaged in. And their lawyers, Mark Davis, one of the lawyers, says that David McBride alerted the Defense Department to this culture of impunity that existed over in Afghanistan. He did so at great risk to his career and reputation, and yet, there's a limitation to what they can say about his case because there are national security orders in place that mean that they cannot discuss some of the details openly, is what Mark Davis, his lawyer, is telling the press. So, let's consider this, because the fact of the matter is, when you look at it in the larger context, I find it amazing and stunning that there has been even a tiny bit of justice in Afghanistan against these troops, or that people within the Australian government would be investigating these acts. And what we're talking about here, just so we don't keep it abstract, is the killings of at least 39 Afghans. They describe a practice known as blooding. This is in reporting in the U.S., like NBC News, or sorry, the Associated Press did this report, and it describes something where soldiers would plant weapons and radios to support false claims that prisoners were enemies killed in action. So what would happen is there would be soldiers out there who would capture Afghans, they would be potentially their first kill. So in order to get that, they would shoot them, and then they would plant the weapons so that they could show that there was a justification for executing them. And this is the kind of war crime that this investigation focused on. It was a 4-year investigation by Major General Paul Brereton, who's a judge and an Army reservist who was asked to look into allegations. And according to the Associated Press, more than 400 witnesses he consulted, and there were thousands of pages of documents that were reviewed. This is a major investigation by one of the Five Eyes countries and an ally of the U.S., and to remind you that we have had nothing on this scale at all. We've had not even a fraction of this when it comes to accountability and justice. And in fact, right now, when we look at the Biden-Harris transition team, General Stanley McChrystal, of all people, is being asked to advise Joe Biden, being invited to be part of that is involved in national security briefings. And here's someone who's implicated in a major torture scandal at Camp Nama. I encourage you to revisit the work of Jeremy Scahill in his book Dirty Wars, where he detailed extensively not only Stanley McChrystal's background, but also looking at the way in which this prison functioned that Joint Special Operations Command oversaw, and the kind of torture that was going on. You CIA people who even said this was going beyond the torture techniques that were authorized. And we know that there were ugly night raids that have been going on in Afghanistan. Those were systematized by Stanley McChrystal. The sort of warrior culture that is being indicted by the media is something that is just commonplace among troops in the last decade in the United States. So, I mean, I have to say that when I read these stories about the Australian special forces, while it is an objectionable behavior, at the same time, it seems like a very nice opportunity for the U.S. government to essentially virtue signal about how it cares about the decorum and the good order and discipline of troops, and that there's a certain way that people should treat those that they capture, when in fact that's not how any U.S. soldiers have acted. And we know from following Julian Assange's case closely and looking at the WikiLeaks revelations that the U.S. government has gone above and beyond to make sure that there's no accountability for soldiers, and even requiring agreements with Afghanistan and Iraq that had immunity for troops so that there could not be investigations of soldiers. So, you know, I don't have any idea if Australia was able to ever get that kind of a sweetheart deal for their own forces, but it does seem like there was there's a cultural difference here, it would seem, where people in Australia saw what some of their own had done and were outraged. Meanwhile, people in the United States, I don't think we really have that kind of reaction. What the warrior does justifies the ends, and so that's the way it all plays out. They get to go around engaged in massacring people, and to even display trophies showing off the people that they killed. I mean, we know we've seen photos circulate in the past where these soldiers were celebrating who they had just killed. So that's my commentary on what we're seeing happen today. And I think obviously for this show, the most crucial thing is that you would have a whistleblower like this in Australia who, you know, no matter where they are in the world, should clearly be seen as a kind of hero for trying to inform the public about this, the unlawful killings of civilians in Afghanistan. And, immediately those charges should be dropped.
Thank you for bringing this story to everyone's attention, Kevin. It might be a stretch of a comparison, but it also reminds me in terms of the U.S.'s conduct of the practice of murdering people with drones and then claiming that they were enemies killed in combat afterwards, which was and is still, I would imagine, a very common practice in the U.S. military.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Our next story here, we have NSA Whistleblower Reality Winner has finally had a hearing on appeal for release. What happened this week?
Yeah, and so just in the interest of taking responsibility, I've been following the appointments and the people who are being brought on board the Biden-Harris transition, and I was looking at this so closely that I neglected a hearing that finally took place earlier in the week. I think it was on Tuesday in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So finally, months later, you might remember we were talking about this on the show, I think it was in the summer, and NSA Whistleblower Reality Winner had COVID-19. There was some concern about how ill she would become and whether it could become fatal. She had claimed that she'd be susceptible to it because of her history, her medical history, which is not to say that she was lying about that background. It's just that she was concerned. And she's still doing okay, and but she continues to fight for her release from prisons because as the pandemic remains intense, and everyone in the United States is looking at unprecedented levels of cases, state to state, and she had an opportunity to her legal team had an opportunity to go argue before an 11th Circuit panel that she should be released, and they made their argument, and of course what the U.S. government is saying to justify keeping her in prison and not releasing is that she has not used her administrative remedies, and that what she is claiming in her case, where she says she has the ability to seek a ruling from a judge, is incorrect. So she believes that her legal team believes that in the First Step Act, it grants you the ability to go to a court. You just have to wait 30 days, and then you can go to a court. And if the warden hadn't acted on it, you can just go to the court, and the court can give you a ruling on your request. And of this nature, I mean, she's asking to be sent to home confinement to finish out the rest of her sentence, which she's expected to. I believe she would be completing a sentence next year. So she's trying to get out before she gets COVID and has a much worse experience when it comes to medical care in the FMC Carswell facility where she is currently being held in Texas. And so this hearing took place. And like I said, it took quite a long time to get to it. We were writing about this back in May and June over at Shadowproof. We were detailing what she was going through, getting comments from her sister Brittany, and following the anguish and anxiety of her mother, Billie Winner Davis. I had a lot of sympathy for what they were going through, and it took this long to finally hear her claim. And unfortunately for them, she doesn't have COVID anymore. So it's possible that they're going to come up with their own pseudoscience, these judges, to suggest that it's not an urgent matter in which she needs to be released, perhaps even suggesting that she's immune now because she got the virus and survived. So that's my concern, is that oftentimes you see judges come up with their own theories to get around providing prisoners any kinds of due process or human rights. And I certainly feel like they'll find a way to escape doing what is just.
I would certainly agree with that, Kevin. I think you know that. Let's get to our last story here. We have a prison block where Assange is confined, has COVID-19 outbreak. Definitely terrible news. What is happening here?
Well, yeah. So this is an incredible story, but most people who are advocates for Julian Assange would likely tell you this is to be expected. And for a country that, unlike the United States, had groups that seemed to have the ear of government officials who were contemplating the need to release more prisoners, it seems rather unconscionable that we're seeing this play out in Britain. I think that you could almost hold them to a higher standard because They claim to uphold human rights to a much greater extent than prisons in the United States, and their reputation usually seems to be better than the US. And yet, in following this case with Julian Assange, I'm learning so much about how we probably shouldn't put it on a pedestal, their prison system. It seems to have just as many of the same issues. We hear stories of disrepair. Not long ago, the ventilation broke down, and Julian Assange was, I believe, freezing cold and dealing with the lack of any heating or something of that nature. And so now we see that the House Block 1 that is in Belmarsh Security Prison is going through a COVID-19 outbreak right now. And the worst spike that at least Europe and the United States and parts of North America are witnessing. Unfortunately, I don't have the greatest tab on what is going on in Asia and other parts of the globe. I assume that everyone's on very high alert when it comes to this virus, since it's become so intense in Europe and the United States. And right now, as this is happening, you've got Assange, who is being kept in this prison, again, denied bail, not allowed to be out on home confinement. There hasn't been a decision where he will be extradited. We're still waiting for January 4th for the decision to come. Has had this pandemic obstruct his ability to participate in his defense. That seems to be a feature of the way he's been held in confinement, something that has been to the benefit of the UK government so that they can continue to cooperate and allow the US government to bring him here for an unprecedented trial. And he is treated like a terrorist and not allowed to be out. And just because he sought political asylum in the Ecuador embassy, he remains in the Belmarsh prison. And that's what has been criminalized. So his partner, Stella Morris, is very concerned and told The Guardian, "I am extremely worried about Julian. Julian's doctors say that he is vulnerable to the effects of the virus. It's not just COVID, though. Every day that passes is a serious risk to Julian. Belmarsh is an extremely dangerous environment where murders and suicides are commonplace. Julian is one of the most widely recognized press freedom and government accountability advocates alive. UK decision makers must change course before they cause Julian to lose his life." There's been the National Journalists Union in England, I believe, who spoke up for Julian Assange's freedom. And we also talked about a very tragic story. It was either last week or a couple of weeks ago. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. We talked about his friend, who's a gay Brazilian who was afraid to be deported to Jair Bolsonaro's Brazil, and ended up committing suicide in his cell. And it was someone who had become a friend of Julian Assange, and he lost that. And we had read and learned about that tragedy through Stella, and also through some of the reporting in The Guardian and other people who were speaking about it. And so this does not reflect well on the prison in the UK. These people should be released. Right now, under this crisis, there should, at the very least, temporarily, there should be home confinement for any of these individuals. Whether they would be recarcerated after the pandemic, that would likely happen. But for right now, it seems pretty clear that the pandemic is being worsened by keeping these people in prison. And it's something that is well within the possibility of being done. There's so much paranoia about what Julian Assange would do. And we know that's why he remains in this pretty high security prison, because everyone thinks that the moment he's set foot outdoors, he's going to find an airplane and try to flee, and he won't face his trial. And so for that reason, it's possible that he could get an illness that potentially turns fatal.
Thank you, Kevin. Why don't you round us out, talk a little bit about your newsletter and anything you've got coming up ahead of us?
Yeah, so just since in general people follow our work, would like to tell you. I would like to tell you that my Dissenter newsletter. If you go to dissenter.substack.com, you can subscribe and get weekly whistleblower stories. I have a collaboration that I'm excited to share coming up in the next few weeks with someone I'm excited to give a platform. But again, I'm using this letter to follow the Biden-Harris transition team and what it means for whistleblowers. The exclusive story for this past week dug into much more detail into the past of Neil McBride, the former U.S. Attorney of the Eastern District of Virginia, the district where Julian Assange is likely to be put on trial if brought to the United States. In fact, definitely that's where he will be put on trial if brought to the United States. And also I did a thread on Twitter at Gosztola in the last 24 hours that looked at the people who are giving Joe Biden his national security briefings, examining these hawkish figures, people who are arbiters of the national security state, gatekeepers of the national security state, if you will. And so I would encourage you to go look at that thread if you're not familiar with who is has the ear of Joe Biden when it comes to national security and foreign policy currently. And I just conclude by passing it back to Brian and saying that I was really excited over the past week to get this fellowship started for Marvel Cook. I know it doesn't necessarily relate, but on the other hand, we've done some whistleblower stories that have a nexus to prisons. We've covered some of sometimes we've had an opportunity to touch on some of the anti-racist organizing that has an intersection with people who are speaking out. And so I'm looking forward to what we'll be able to produce over the next months here and who will be able to give a platform at Shadowproof, because the media economy is not getting any less harsh, and the environment for people who are trying to hold down jobs is very difficult. And also some of these platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Google are more censorious as the days go by. And so we have to do a lot of work independently in order to get what we have to share out to people. And we depend on those of you. And we may have a small audience, but it's a very devoted and dedicated. And I'm very glad to have all of you as viewers and grateful that you tune in. And I thank you for being here and being willing to donate, give, and share our show and share the work we produce at Shadowproof, because this is really how you have to do it. I think this is one of the only ways to be successful now, unless you have a celebrity image that you can cash in on and take to Substack or some other platform, which I'm not saying people shouldn't make a living if they're well known, but I think the standard way that independent journalists like us are trying to get by and survive is very difficult. And I think we've come up with a pretty good method of trying to provide a platform to people who deserve it, and then also get our work out there at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely don't want to throw any shade on Substack. I think it's been an important tool for our work. I think it's an important tool for a lot of journalists. I think at the same time, it's important to recognize that Substack and a lot of these platforms exist to plug holes left behind by the destruction of journalism in this country and even around the world. So, I definitely encourage folks to encourage their favorite, to support their favorite writers, support Kevin on Substack, but also think about ways that you can, if you have the funds or if you have other means to support, how you can support independent publications directly, so that we don't have journalism completely transformed into the gig economy. Journalism requires a lot of support. It requires a lot of resources. It's a very, very, very difficult thing to do on your own. It's a very difficult way to have to survive And a lot of people, very understandably, very good journalists, jump ship and go to other lines of work because you can't make it this way. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So thank you.
Well, and I think you should reward people who are doing the digging and
Yep.
very, very basic follow the money journalism. I do think we need less funding of people who have the best takes and more funding of the people who you can tell are putting in a lot of work and effort and labor to talk to sources, to talk to people. We just are about to, in the next few hours, you'll see a piece appear at our website from Michael Sionato, who talked to, and these are horrible stories, talked to families that are trying to survive after their homes were up in the wildfires in California and Oregon. And that's important journalism. I feel a sense of pride in being able to publish a story like, because it means that we're doing the function that we should be performing at Shadowproof, rather than just me riffing on something I heard on MSNBC that I didn't like, that I can make myself feel better in a way because I own the liberals today, and so I can congratulate myself privately. I'm not really sure that that's how we're going to be able to keep up struggles for justice and liberation, and I'm not sure how we're ever going to make a dent in some of these issues that we cover week to week if it's just about scoring points against people we have factional differences with. So I really believe that there's a lot of good work that we're doing, and that also you'll notice that at Shadowproof, the last thing I'll say, that we're trying to decentralize and expand the different sorts of places that you can find the work that we do. I'm spread out in a lot of different places. I've posted to Medium in the past couple of years. I've posted to Substack. We've had videos up on YouTube. I'm also trying out this new platform now called Rockfin that I asked one of the managers there about, and he filled me in on how it works. And I noticed that Jimmy Dore and Lee Camp and some other people who have popular YouTube shows were using it for their content. And I'm going to try it out as a hosting place for the show I do weekly, Unauthorized Disclosure with Rania Kalik. And I don't know if it'll have a place for this show at some point, or if we'll create a second channel and we'll update some Dissenter. We'll post Dissenter there. It just depends. I am concerned because there are videos that we've posted from our own website here, from this stream that have been demonetized. When we talk about war, they've been flagged, and YouTube has told us that they're going to limit the kind of ads that are attached to it. And I have no reluctance when it comes to speaking about this while using YouTube to stream this show, because I think if that's the way it's going to be, in its effect, it will be suppressing journalism. And I'm not going to be pushed into just doing right versus left journalism for the next 40 to 50 years of my life. I'm not here to just score points against conservatives. Likewise, I'm not going to get flustered and jaded and go become like the next Andrew Breitbart or something and try to expose the left with whatever I have to share. And yet that's what YouTube seems to be encouraging. Like they want people to be tribal. They want that, and that kind of substance free that doesn't get to the heart of stories. So I don't mind ranting about this at the end of our show, because I think every week, it's worth filling our followers and our viewers in on where our heads are at when it comes to the work we're doing. And since we don't really have a weekly Shadowproof update show, I mean, this is a nice way to let you all know what we're doing. And so I thank you all for sticking around too. We haven't been talking about stories for the Dissenter Weekly. We just got a group of like a half dozen or so people who are listening to us rant against the media and rage that life isn't better for us. So I thank you, because obviously there's better things you probably could be doing. But thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank the couple of folks who have chipped in money. I think my partner Victoria, who's been helping us out a lot in the background here at Shadowproof, seems to have set up the super chat. So I just wanted to say a big thanks to everybody on YouTube who's been chipping in some money during this episode. Really makes a big difference, and it means a lot to us. So thank you so much. And just to close out, just a reminder again, please make sure you're following us. Please make sure you're subscribed to Kevin's newsletter. And if you're able to, go to shadowproof.com/donate and chip in, or just tell your friends and family about us, share our articles, whatever you can do to help spread the word. We really appreciate it. So I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we will catch up with you next week. Thank you so much.
Oh, actually, next week is Thanksgiving week. So y'all save that money, save your coffee money, and don't get COVID. Don't spread the COVID, and we'll be back in a couple weeks.
All right, 2 weeks. That's right. All right, everybody, take care.